This video is going to talk about reciprocal trig functions and our normal trig functions with angle measures that exceed the unit circle. So if we look at example letter A, where we're given the fact that secant of theta equals 29 over 20 and cotangent of theta is greater than 0. So what that means for us is we need to first take a look at secant of theta and noticing that that is a positive value. And then we're also going to look at that inequality and see that the cotangent of theta is greater than 0, which means that the cotangent of theta is also positive. So when we're looking at how to draw our triangle, we want to make sure that we're drawing our triangle within the correct quadrant. Well, where is secant and cotangent both positive? And that happens to be in quadrant 1. So I'm going to go ahead and draw me a mini coordinate plane that emphasizes quadrant 1. And I'm going to go ahead and construct that right triangle, just like so. Now the other thing we want to take a look at is that the secant of theta is the hypotenuse over the adjacent. So that's going to help me with labeling those values alongside of my right triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and put the hypotenuse as 29 and the adjacent as 20 because the angle that we're looking for is here close to the origin. Now when trying to figure out exact values of this theta, we are going to want to make sure that we find that missing side length, and to do so we're going to use the Pythagorean Theorem. This is going to be a 20, 21, and 29 triangle. So when we look at the sine of theta, remember that the sine of theta is opposite over the hypotenuse. And so that's going to equal 21 over 29. Opposite being the side length that's the farthest away from your angle measure. Tangent of theta is our opposite over the adjacent. And so when we look at that, it's going to be 21 over 20. And then the cosecant of theta, remember that the cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we can look at this one of two ways. First off, we can look at this as being the hypotenuse over the opposite, and we will get the fraction of 29 over 21. Or because we had already done the math right here of sine and knowing that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, I could have just simply taken that fraction and flipping it using the definition of reciprocal. Letter B. When constructing this right triangle, it's important that we take a look at this coordinate and construct it just like if we were going to plot that point on our coordinate plane. So again, constructing this coordinate plane, I'm going to emphasize quadrant 3 because that is where my x and y values are both negative. So if I go ahead and go over to -8 and down -15, bringing my triangle back to the origin and constructing that theta and right triangle. Again, we're going to need the hypotenuse, and again, using the Pythagorean Theorem to do so. Just important that you plug in that -8 and -15 in parentheses before you square it to make sure that you get the correct values on the unit or on your calculator. The hypotenuse is 17. So when we look at the cosine of theta, we are talking about the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And so therefore, this is going to be -8 over 17. Secant of theta is the reciprocal of cosine. So again, we can look at this one of two ways. First, we can look at it as being the hypotenuse over the adjacent. And so using that right triangle, it would be 17 over -8. Or because of the fact that we had already found the cosine of theta to be -8 over 17, and knowing the relationship between cosine and secant, being able to use the definition of reciprocal and flipping that fraction, giving us that 17 over negative 8 as well. The last one is cotangent. So because we're working with a right triangle, we can again look at this as one of two ways. First, we can look at it as being the adjacent over opposite. And so therefore that would be negative 8 over negative 15. And then a negative over negative would give me a positive. So really we're going to write this as 8 over 15. The other way, because we're given an ordered pair, we can look at cotangent of theta as being x over y, the reciprocal of tangent. And so we could have looked at this just by the ordered pair and not needing to draw that right triangle. Seeing again that it would have been negative 8 over negative 15, and then those negatives canceling out, again giving us that 8 over 15.